good. Okay, if I sit here, what picture do I get? That's a good picture. And now no kids to bug us. Alright, you comfortable?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's go through these pictures. I grabbed a group of pictures out of Dad's cabinets. So why don't you show the picture to us and then tell me about what happened there. Or just tell me something about people in the picture, something that's interesting.
Oh.
Okay, so this picture. Alright, where was that?
This is a christening, a baptism of a child in Brooklyn. This is when I was at Nazarene Congregational Church in Brooklyn, New York. I was there for 10 years. And during that time, I did a lot of baptism because people liked the way I did them. They were kind of unique.
What was unique about it?
Well, I after baptizing the baby at the font, I usually walk up and down the aisle with the baby. Like Jesus was, when he said to his disciples, "Suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not, for such is the kingdom of heaven." He grabbed the kids and started walking with them and talking. So that's what I do in my baptismal service. Now this one.
Got it. Oh, well, see, that's another one with you holding the baby.
Yeah. This one is the first one that I did in the new church start in Columbus, Ohio. And that was Victor Moore baby.
Really? That was in 72.
72?
So we were still in New York, because we left New York in 76.
Okay, it looked like the one in.
This looks like Nazarene to me.
Yeah,
this was Nazarene.
Yeah.
James Keith McAllister.
Okay, yeah, that was in Brooklyn.
Okay.
Now this is a summer staff that I worked on in Cleveland, Ohio. I was interested in pursuing a ministry working with inner city kids, working in the inner city. And I worked on that project in Cleveland. It was an international staff. That one guy is there from Australia, and of course there were white and black. We was a mixed team working together in the inner city. Oh, now this is a picture of constructing the building that I built in Africa, in East Africa. When I went to East Africa, my first trip to Africa was with Operation Crossroad Africa in I can't remember the date now, but I stayed in Kenya for 3 months, and that's what we did. We built a large community center, and I went back to Kenya maybe 10 years later, and I saw that center in operation. It was a clinic, medical clinic, a school, a government office, and a recreation hall for young people. That was quite exciting. Now, this picture is a picture of Bill Land, Reverend Bill Land and myself, and we're in Corinth on one of the Greek islands where Paul wrote one of his epistles. Bill and I traveled with 22 white people, visited 19 countries in Europe and Africa, that on locations where we have projects going, schools, clinics, and farms, and churches, and schools mainly what we saw. Here's a picture of Elizabeth. That's the girl we adopted when she first came to us. And if you recall, one Christmas, just before Christmas, you and Dan came to us and said, we have discovered what we want for Christmas. We would like to have a sister. And y'all asked the questions, are we black and middle class? And we said yes. And you said that they say on TV, if you're black and middle class, we're looking for you to adopt some of these hard-to-place kids. And so we said okay, and in March of that year, the following year, we got Elizabeth.
She came during that blizzard. I think it was like the first time she stayed.
It was a blizzard in March.
Was it 80, 70? What year was it? The blizzard of 82?
I can't remember the dates. Now these are two pictures of Ruth before we got married. This is at that park where you guys played in Columbus, in Atlanta when you were there.
Okay. And I guess this is her graduation.
And that's her graduation, when she graduated from seminary with a master's in Christian education.
How did you meet Mom?
Oh, that was an interesting story. When I returned from Scotland, while I was in Scotland, I met a minister who said he had a brother who taught at a seminary in America. And the seminary was in Decatur, Georgia, right out from Atlanta, where I was going to school.
Right.
So he said to me, when you get back to America, I want you to go and meet my brother. So when I got back to America and got back to Atlanta, I called him. And he said, I would like for you to come out to the seminary because I'd like to meet you. And he also said, I've been here 13 years, and this is the first year I've taught a black kid, and I want you to meet my black student. So when I got there, I met Ruth. That was his black student. And she was having a hard time because she was the first black on that campus. No black student had ever gone to that school before.
Wow.
And she was catching all kind of hell. The president of the student body met me the day I went out there, and he said she really needs somebody to be a companion or something because she's having a hard time, and we hope she won't leave the school, but there are a lot of kids here who want her to leave. And there were ministers who, when they registered for a class, if they found out that she was in the class, they dropped the class. They wouldn't go to class with her. And 2 or 3 of her classes, she was the only student in it, sitting there by herself with the professor. Because the white students would not go to class with her.
At a seminary?
At a seminary, yeah. These were ministers and future ministers. That's how difficult things were in Atlanta in those days.
Wow.
And there was a Presbyterian school. So I befriended her just to help her get through that year in seminary. And I had no intentions of being romantic with her. So I took her to a couple of movies, and when I was in Europe, of course I became interested in the opera and musicals and things like that. And a lot of them was in Atlanta, but black folks couldn't go to them. And but the law had been passed to break down into segregation, but a lot of blacks just didn't bother with it. But I was interested in going to a lot of those things, and I didn't want to go myself, so I would take her as a companion, and that's how our relationship grew.
Well, when did you go from friends to having a romantic interest in her?
After about a year. And the following year, I was going to Africa. That following summer, I was going to be in Africa all that summer and away from her. So I took the money that they had given me to take my shots and things like that for Africa and bought her an engagement ring because I had got all the medical attention I needed free. When the doctor in town found out that I was going to Africa, he made a contribution to see that I get all my shots.
Wow. How did you propose to her?
I didn't propose to her first. I asked her mother.
Okay.
It was Mother's Day, so I bought her. We went to church that day. She went to hear me preach, and we came back from church, and it was Mother's Day, so I bought her mother some flowers, and I took the flowers and then gave them to her. And then I asked her, could I marry Ruth? And she said, what did Ruth say? And I said, I haven't asked her yet. She said, well, you better go and ask her before I tell you my answer. So I went in and asked her, and she said yes. And so I went back and told her mother that she said yes. She said, well, y'all go get married then. I said, well, not now. I'm going to Africa for the summer, and I'll be gone for 4 months, and then I'll be back. And we can talk more about it when I come back. Okay. Now, this is one of the seminars that I was participating in when I was getting a master's degree in counseling and pastoral care at New York Theological Seminary. I think there were only 2 blacks in that whole program. There was another guy named Irvin and myself. That's when I met the rabbi.
Oh.
That you know.
Right.
Yeah. But that was my 3rd degree, Masters of Sacred Theology in pastoral counseling, and I got a certificate in psychiatric counseling. Now, this is an interesting picture too. When I was a pastor of the church in Brooklyn, we had a program where I would take the kids from the inner city to live in the suburbs,
right,
for a weekend, and then I had the white kids from the suburbs to come to the ghetto for a weekend, and we established that relationship with that church and connected in New York.
So we lived in the ghetto.
Yeah, yeah, we actually did, and. Interesting thing about this trip, we went up to Schenectady in New York, and our kids got a chance to sit in the moon buggy that went to the moon. We got to see that before it even went to the moon. And also microwave ovens were just coming in, and we got a chance to see some microwave ovens that year.
Wow.
And those kids were exposed to that. But one of the white families wanted their son to be home the weekend we went to Schenectady. So he was home that weekend, so one of the black kids could stay in the house. And on his way back to college, after we left, he was killed in an automobile accident. So Herb Detweiler, who was a minister for education at the church, asked me before leaving, what could they do for us? And I said, we need some wheels. We need a van.
Right.
So he told that to the church. And the day he told it to the church was the day that they found out this boy had been killed. So they said, instead of, in lieu of flowers, give money toward the van for the church in Brooklyn. So this is what they're doing, presenting us with the key to that van.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, this is a picture when I pledged the Omega Psi Phi fraternity at Livingston College. My intentions were to join the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity because I had read that manual and it was the first one, and Martin Luther King was an Alpha, and that's what I want to do. But I didn't have the money to pledge. I didn't have the money to go over, so I just forgot about it. But the Omegas on campus were about to be kicked off campus because of their low grade point average. For the whole chapter, it was below the average to stay on campus. So what the Omegas did, they went around recruiting people who were on the dean list. And I was on the dean list at that time. So they said, we will pay your way if you become an Omega. You don't have to worry about anything. So, and I like two of the Omegas were good friends of mine, John Kennard and Archie Moses, Henry Moses. So Henry Moses was my size, and he said, I'll loan you all my suits and everything, so you won't have to worry about that. And Henry paid some of the money, and John paid some of the others also. So that's how I was able to pledge Omega.
What was it like as an Omega on campus?
What was it like?
Yes.
I was very popular. I was popular before I became an Omega. And I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the popularity, and I enjoyed the fraternity life, the little bit that I was able to share. Because, see, a lot of the fraternity activities were on the weekends. And I was pastor of a church in South Carolina. 3 years of my college, 3 years of the 4 years that I was in college, I had a church.
Really?
Yeah.
Is that how you paid to go to school?
That's right. That's how I paid to go to school. That way, and also being the janitor of the library. And I was very interested in the story behind being a janitor of the library. They called me in the office one day and said that I owed them $6,000 and that they could not give me any more credit, and I had to leave. So they were figuring out how I was going to leave because I didn't have any money to leave with, and didn't know exactly where I was going to go.
Mm-hmm.
So the business manager just told me to just sit there and wait till she figured all this stuff out. Meanwhile, the librarian called to the office and said that the two men that was the janitors of the library were on a drunk, and they went on these drinking binges every now and then, and they stayed off for 2 weeks. And she said, Mr. Carnegie, who gave us the library, is coming to town, and we don't want this library to be in a mess like this, so we got to get it clean. So the business manager came over to me and asked me, did I know how to clean? I said, yes. What do you have to want me to clean? She said, I want you to go there and help the lady clean the library. So when I got over there, the lady showed me what needed to be done. And she didn't have time because she was getting things together for Mr. Carnegie. I cleaned that library, and she said, and all the time those men had been there cleaning that library, it never looked that clean. And there was 2 of them and just 1 of me. So she said, we'd like to have this young man to be the janitor. So the business manager said to me, if you take that job as a janitor, we won't send you home. You can stay here. So I did for the next 3 years. I took care of that library. I got William Ross to help me 1 year. He was my cousin who came up from Opelika. But that's how I was able to do it. Get my tuition and pay them back the $6,000. I took care of that library. And when those 2 men got over there drunk and came back, they got fired.
Wow. Well, how did you get to Livingston?
I hitchhiked. You know that Ebony magazine story that was about me? Hitchhiking, the little boy who hitchhiked his way to college. I got the article in there. I'll show you. It was in the Ebony magazine. It was written up in the Ebony magazine. But when I graduated from high school, people in Opelika gave me money, and it came up to $100. So when I left Opelika that day, the bus would have cost me $58. And that would have been half of my money, and I didn't want to do that.
Right.
So I hitchhiked all the way from Opelika to Salisbury, North Carolina. It took me 3 days to do it. But I did it. And I only had a suit. My father gave me an old black suit and 2 white shirts. And I had 2 changes of underwear. That's all I had. And I had it in a brown paper bag under my arm. That's why I give foot lockers to all the kids who go to college. Because when I got to Livingston, all the kids who were coming in had foot lockers. And I had my stuff in a brown paper bag. I never forget that. And I had 7 to 8 of the $100 when I got to college. I went in the business office and I told them how much money I had, and I gave it to them. And the bishops had promised me some money.
Right.
Because I was a preacher at the time in the Evans Church. But instead of giving me money, they gave me a church. So I can earn it. So it was really difficult in those days. I remember the kids would go out at night and get hamburgers and hot dogs. You could get a hamburger for a dime, a hot dog for a nickel, and a nickel for a soda. But I couldn't afford that. So I could never go out with the kids at night when they went out and got food.
Wow. You also mentioned, you shared with me that there was a situation while you were visiting the Alphas where you ended up throwing a guy out the window.
Oh, yes. That was an Alpha who was in the chaplain. He had befriended me. He was very, he was very friendly. He had given me money and given me books and stuff like that, because they all knew I was poor. I was the poorest thing on campus. And then one night he proposed that I would have sex with him. And that frightened me, because no male had ever done that before. And I just grabbed him and threw him out of a window and was beating on his hand. He was holding on for dear life. And it just so happened that the resident counselor came by and saw it and pulled him back in the window and told me if I had kept doing that, he would have fallen down 4 stories and I would have been in prison.
Oh.
But he also told me then that if I tried to pledge Alpha, he was going to blackball me. But I never had the money to pledge. And the only reason I was able to pledge is the Omegas gave me that money, and I was on the dean list when they needed some scholars. So life was very difficult for me during those years. I was in college for 5 years. I was at Livingston 5 years, all total. And I got $4 from home in those 5 years. Because they didn't have any money. My people didn't have any money. And when I told Daddy I was going to college, he told me I was a damn fool to try to go to college. He said, you had to pay your own way through high school. I couldn't help you doing high school. I can't help you in college. I said, well, I don't want you to help me. I just want you to give me permission to go. Because, see, I couldn't leave home without his permission. In fact, kids in those days didn't do anything without their parents' permission. So he gave me permission to leave and go to college, so I went.
You have an interesting story about your mother leaving your father and you ending up back with your father.
Yes. See, Daddy was 40 years older than Mama. And what happened was, the whole story was that my father's second wife came down with cancer, and they needed someone to take care of her. So they were our cousins. They put they farmed Mama out to my father to take care of his ailing wife. So she was in the house with her about 12 years.
So your mother was related to your father?
No, I don't know that they were related.
Okay.
They were cousins or something like that. I all mixed up that. But anyhow, for 12 years she took care of his wife, who was dying of cancer. But before the lady got sick, she took care of all the bills and everything. So she kind of put that over on Mama, and Mama was doing that. Because see, Daddy never went to school a day in his life. He couldn't write his name. And he depended on her. So when she died, when his wife died, he just let her stay on in the house to take care of his bills and things like she was doing. And then a set of twins came along. And they died in infancy. They died at childbirth, I think they call it. But anyhow, after they died
at childbirth, did they receive names?
I don't know. I can't remember that. Juke may be able to tell you that.
Okay.
Yeah. But anyhow, after that, another set of twins were born. And they died also, I think. Yeah, they died. And then Harvey came along. So he married her then. But he was 40 years older than she. So they didn't get along at all. It was very difficult for them to get along, with that age span like that. And so one night, I don't know how this all happened, but Dad and I had been working somewhere. And we came home, and when we got home, Mama said that the lady around the street wanted to see Daddy, for him to go around there and see her. So he went around there, and I went with him. And then they sent for me to come back. And we all got on the truck. All our furniture and everything was on the truck. And we went on down to Phoenix City, Alabama, for Mama to live with her sister, Aunt Josie. So that's how they separated. And they all knew I was very fond of my daddy. And I was his eyes and ears because he was beginning to lose his eyesight. And whatever job he had to do, I just went along with him and did it. Mm-hmm. People thought he did it. And so when we moved to Phoenix City, I didn't like the whole idea and never understood it. And they always knew I was going to slip off and go back to Opelika. So they would hide my clothes from me to keep me from doing it. But I got on a train, rode between two trains, mm-hmm. and I saw a lot of hobos doing that. So I hoboed my way back to Opelika on the train.
How many days did it take you?
It was a matter of hours. It was only 28 miles.
Oh, okay.
On a train.
What did your father say when you returned?
He was glad to see me come back because he was missing me, and he had to turn down a lot of jobs because he would take a job He was a landscaper,
Okay.
as we would call it today. They called them yard men in those days. So he could take jobs now since I was back, because I knew how to do everything he had to do on those jobs, and I did it. And he, got the money and all like that. But also, he needed someone to cook and wash and all that stuff for him, so I did that. So I got used to doing that.
How did your father handle it after you left for college?
Well, when Mama came back to see me graduate from high school, and the night that we were there for my graduation part, after the graduation was over, we all went back to the house, and we were talking, and the question came up about what I was going to do now, and I said, I want to go to college, so I want to leave in June. I mean, in October, I think it was, or September. And then Mama said, okay, if you're going to leave, I'll come back and take care of your daddy. So by my leaving, going to college, they got back together. She came back to take care of him.
And how many brothers and sisters did you have? You had 7?
There were 8 of us, 4 boys and 4 girls. And now there's 7 of us now, because Benjamin died as a baby.
How did he die?
He was quadriceptic. He had a big, big head. We call them waterhead babies. His head was about this big, and his body was like that. And he stayed in a little wagon all the time. I had to pull the wagon around. I took care of him. He died in my arms. 2 kids died in my arms as a kid. One kid was hit by a white man who was drunk.
Mm-hmm.
He drove his car off the road, hit that child that night. I picked her up. We were waiting for the ambulance to come and take her to the hospital. Well, what happened was this white man, after he hit the child, he came back to see what had happened. And he said, well, I'll go down here and I'll call the ambulance for them to come take her to the hospital. And that's what he did. He called the ambulance to come and get the child. There was a white ambulance that came out there. When they saw it was a black kid, they wouldn't take him. So by the time the black undertaker got there with the ambulance, the kid was dead.
Wow. Well, you met Mom. You married Mom. After you were married, what did you two do?
Well, she got married. She finished a seminary in August and got a job in Louisville, Kentucky. And then I had a graduate fellowship to teach African anthropology and get a PhD in African anthropology and work in the lab and work in that department. So it was in Nashville, Tennessee, so that's where I went. And she went to Louisville and I went to Nashville.
After you were married?
No, before we got married. And then when we got married, it was the same thing. That started out in September of that year. She living in Louisville and I living in Nashville. And then we got married Thanksgiving weekend in November 26th. So after we got married, she continued to stay in Louisville and I was in Nashville. And then the church opened up in Cincinnati. That was a white church where half of the members decided to go to the suburbs and build a new church. Mm-hmm. And 30 white families decided to stay at the church downtown and invite the black people in the neighborhood into the church. They already had a white pastor. They needed a black pastor to be with them. So they selected me. And I took the job because I had been in school all these years and didn't have a dime. I didn't have any money or anything. So they said if I take the job, they would give me an apartment and furnish it. They would give me a car allowance, and they would give it to me in advance so I could have a car. It was a good deal, good setup. And they really wanted me. After they interviewed about 12 or 13 prospective ministers, and they ended up with me. That was a real good job. It was a good project, but the white guy just couldn't deal with me, and I couldn't deal with his tactics.
What do you mean?
When I first got to the church, if the telephone would ring 5 times at the church, it would be 4 for Bob and 1 for Sam. Well, after being there for about 2 months or 3 months, it reversed. It was 4 for me and 1 for Bob. And Bob was saying that I was trying to run him out of the church and take over the church.
You're right.
But I was not. It was just that the people was latching on to me, and they really wanted him to lead.
So he was you were co-ministers.
Yeah, co-pastors.
Okay.
Yeah. But he wanted to be the top dog because he had been there the longest. And he wanted to tell me what to do. And, you know, I let him do it for a while. But, you know, the people, when I would preach, all the people would come out that Sunday. They didn't care to come. They didn't come. And there was a lot of things like that. When they wanted counseling, they called me.
Mm-hmm.
Kids got in trouble or something like that, they would call me instead of him. And he said, you know, they should call him because he was the senior pastor. And we would go to staff meetings, and he would just be frustrated because he saw his ministry just waning, you know.
Wow. And after Cincinnati, you went to...
Well, that Christmas, we was in Cincinnati. We went to New York for Christmas holidays. While in New York, a friend of mine, who was the association minister, Benny Whiting, was in New York. So at the airport, I called Benny, and I just called to wish him a Merry Christmas. And he said, Sam, I got a church in Brooklyn that needs a pastor, and you would be just the guy for that. I'd like to put your name in. And I said, you can go ahead and put my name in. So he put my name in, and that was in December. That was in December when I called him at Christmas time. But sometime in February, that church contacted me and asked me to come up for an interview. So I went up for an interview, and then they wanted me to come back in April to preach and bring Ruth. So I went back and I preached and took Ruth, and they called me.
They wanted to see what your wife looked like?
Well, yeah, and they wanted her to be part of the interview process also, and see where we were going to live and all like that.
No, okay. Advent. We have 3 minutes left on this. What can you say about your experience at Advent?
Well, Advent was a very difficult experience. First of all, it was a new church start, and they had not been started in black churches. They had been started in white churches in the United Church of Christ. They had never started a black church before. But what they really wanted this church to be was an interracial church. So we started out as an interracial church, having both black and white.
Right.
And they had never done that before.
Right.
So, but they said if it go all black, it's okay, because we have 6 white churches in Columbus where we don't have any black. You see So we liked it. It's okay. So we started out with the original intent of it, establishing and developing a new interracial church. And it was difficult, very hard to get black and white folks to do things together in those days. But we did it, you know, we got the church going. And I look back over it now and see it as a crowning experience because the church is still going. It's 30 years old this year.
Right.
And, you know, I've established something that's going to be permanent. And, you know, a lot of ministers can't look back on their record and say that they have pastored as well as founded churches. But I did both. And it required all my skills to establish that church. It required a lot of patience and a lot of unusual work. And I did it. And established some good relationships in the process.